on paid maternity or sick leave.
Okay, great. She talked about what do we do about maternity leave and do we support maternity leave, paid maternity leave. I have 3 children and I was working when I had my first 2. And it's incredibly important that someone can go and be able to work their job, do their job well, and still be able to go and have a child. I actually had what I had to do at that time because there was no paid maternity leave was to have short-term benefits for maternity leave. I think it's important for us to make sure that we are letting our businesses know, we're letting people know that this is something that's incredibly important. And if we want more women in the market, then in jobs, then we need to be able to provide those. Again, I always am very careful when I leave it up to the federal government to implement some sort of law because they actually end up hurting people more than helping. So I'd love to hear your ideas of what you think. I think it would be important to be able to have those. I support that. But where it's being implemented, it's always an issue to me. I don't think it should be implemented on a federal level. I think we do a lot better here implementing those issues here in our state and especially in the workforce.
Representative Love, I want to make sure I understand you correctly on the gender wage gap as well. Is that your same stance on the wage gap? Is that the federal government is not the solution, yet innovation and free market is the solution?
I think what I talked about is the federal government is not always the solution. I think that, yes, free markets are the solution. I also think that we need to go back and make sure we're talking about education, because in order for women to be able to get into the workforce and fix that wage gap, we have to make sure that they have the education in order to get into those high-end jobs. That's why I'm on the Career Technical Education the caucus in Washington to make sure that we're providing resources like STEM education to our young girls. What I didn't get to mention, I started mentioning it, was my daughter who wants to be a rocket scientist. It's important for her to be able to have all the tools that she needs in order to be able to go, start in high school, get an education in college, and be able to be ready and prepared. And when she gets into the workforce, yes, she should be paid the same amount that a man gets paid for the same job that they do.
But does the federal government play any role in that at all?
Well, the federal government plays a role in terms of making sure that we have the tools that we need in education. The federal government plays a role when we bring light to the issue and talk about that. Talk about the fact that we want to be able to have women in these high-end jobs. Women are just as capable as any man. Again, I'm one of the few women in Congress, and it's incredibly difficult to be in a male-dominated field, and so I have some insight into that. But I came in with the tools that I needed in order to be able to jump in and work hard and show up for Utah. And so I think that again, we have to make sure that we're not trying to deal with the problem at the end of the story. We're trying to make sure that our young girls have the tools that they need so that they're competitive for those jobs.
You said it was incredibly difficult to be a woman in a male-dominated field. Can you give us an example of what you mean by that? What makes it difficult?
Well, it's I have to always be incredibly careful who I go to dinner with, when I go, so that there's not someone taking a picture. I have to make sure that I am that I show up prepared. It's important for me to make sure that I'm an example to all of those young girls that are out there who are aspiring to do something bigger outside of their community, in their state, whether it's in their country. I have to be an example. And these are issues that we deal with. I'm on the select committee as a mother. It's an opportunity for me to talk about these things because I am a parent. I have some insight as to some of the demographics in the United States. What's difficult about this is that we as a country need to make sure that we have representation that mirrors the constituents that are out there. And so that's what I mean by certain insights, and sometimes it's difficult because people tend to talk about issues that they really don't know very much about.
You spent a lot of time tonight defending mailers, the importance of communicating.
That's right, yeah.
is that the most important issue in this race? Well, what issue didn't get addressed tonight that you think was really critical?
Well, I think it's important to bring up the fact that, look, someone is they're using this as a way to get themselves up in a campaign, and that's what he was saying is completely false. That these are non-political in nature. They have to be non-political in nature. Matheson actually spent more time and effort and resources communicating with his residents, and that was important. He did that well, and I wanted to keep up the same level of communication in this district. I find it outrageous that somebody would come after you for communicating with your residents. I've been able to help people. We get feedback. Not everyone has internet. Not everyone has a computer at their home, and it's my responsibility to still reach them. So with that being said, if somebody cares so much, I think the real issue is what somebody's done in the past is what they're going to be doing in the future. And if someone cares so much about taxpayer dollars, I think he should explain how he costs Utahns over $250 million in taxpayer funds when he opposed the Legacy Highway, when he delayed the Legacy Highway. He stood with Rocky Anderson and special interest groups, and it cost every Utah family over $3,000.
The question was, though, not to ask you to defend that again. You say you spent a lot of time defending it during the debate. What other issues would you have liked to have gotten to? What else is important to your district?
I would have loved to have gotten to the debt issue. Which is incredibly important to the district. We talked about a lot of things, but there were several issues that we face. The regulatory agencies and why Congress really doesn't have the power that they need to make sure that they move legislation forward. So let me give you an example right here. It's incredibly important that everyone knows this. In the 114th Congress, the Congress that I'm part of, we've passed over 228 pieces of legislation that went on and signed on by the president. The regulatory agencies alone last year wrote 3,408 rules and regulations that we live by today. So even if we were to undo what they're doing, we couldn't undo it fast enough. And remember, these are the people that have never held an election. These are people that are not accountable to us. So those are issues I would have liked to have gotten to. There's so many different issues out there, but that is certainly one of them.
Congresswoman, I want to go back to climate change. What role do you think humans play in climate change?
I think that question is irrelevant. Let me tell you why. I recognize that there's an issue. And it doesn't matter to me whether that is caused by one thing or another. What matters to me is solutions to making sure that we're addressing the issues. And I know that this is something that my party doesn't typically like to get into, but I'm willing to have that conversation. I'm willing to recognize that we do have some issues that we need to address. I also think that it's a false narrative to say that you can't have energy production and save the economy. Save the environment. I think it's important that we recognize that, it's not one or the other, that we can actually, through innovation, through talking to each other, to getting the people that are directly related to this at the table so that we can do everything we can to be good stewards of the land that we live on.
Are you going to vote for Gary Johnson?